talking about public land usage in Arizona. Furthermore, we're going to be diving into the challenges and threats that protected land faces. Specifically, the challenges with access in the state famed with its beautiful landscape. Before we get into that, let's talk background. So, the federal government owns 43% of the land in Arizona, which translates to 30,741,287 acres. The Bureau of Land Management oversees the largest portion, which is 12.1 million acres throughout Arizona. U.S. Forests, National Park, and Fish and Wildlife oversee the large portion, including 6 national forests and 22 national parks. Arizona is unique in the sense that outdoor recreation is the main driver of the state's economy, which contributes $21 billion to the state's economy. The Bureau of Land Management oversees, manages, and enforces all of that. Public land in Arizona is a multi-use concept. This means that most of the land is owned by the federal government and is meant for and open to hiking, camping, hunting, and in some cases cattle grazing. There is, however, very specific regulations to keep land sustainable. These include firewood cutting permits, the type of vehicle that is allowed to be used, fire burning areas, and wildlife protection. Additionally, Arizona also has state trust land, which is managed by the Arizona State Land Department and can be used for similar purposes, but may require different permits for users regarding hunting, fire burning, and vehicle usage.
To talk about the problem, public land is a huge culture for many natives and tourists. However, over 4 million acres of public land is blocked off and has no public access due to private landowners buying the surrounding land and cutting off access. New residents move west and prevent public access through their private property to public lands. It's a double-edged sword. Public lands are incredibly important to life for many Arizona natives and tourists. The land provides jobs for hunting and hiking guides, and nature has an important cultural significance to the natives in the area. Many jobs depend on the tourism that these beautiful, protected landscapes bring. However, on the other hand, they cannot expect private landowners to just allow passage through the land they own. While it is a problem, it is their right to not allow strangers and hikers on their land. We interviewed hunting guide Jacob Hernandez because he is a key stakeholder whose livelihood depends on taking people into public land all over the state. We asked him what the importance of public land in Arizona was to him. He said, "I primarily use the land to hunt and fish and camp, but anyone has a right to enjoy the land as much as I do. Public land protects our history as a nation, wildlife, and their natural habitat and the state's natural beauty. Everyday cities are developing further out and encroaching on our public land. There is a thing we call landlocked, where there is a giant piece of public land, but private property bought around it closes and locks access to the public land. I believe we all need to do what we can to protect and preserve the public land in Arizona so all the future generations can enjoy it just the way you and I do today." He then followed with, "It keeps us hunters and other recreational public land users from using the land that belongs to us." In Arizona alone, 243,000 acres of federal land and 1.3 million acres of state land are completely landlocked. This issue started as early as the 19th century. To establish commerce and facilitate settlements across the new west of the United States, Congress granted land to settlers and railroad companies to build townships in square parcels of land. The hope was to develop that land and hope that railroads would increase the value of the remaining public lands that Congress also planned to sell. Additionally, the Homestead Act allowed Westerners to claim the lower value public land who built ranchers all the way around this land and up to many natural terrain features. This surrounded land that, at the time, was so cheap and unwanted and created total barriers that cut off access. The beautiful public land out west and its conservation did not become important until outdoorsmen and conservationists like President Theodore Roosevelt championed the ideas of federally conserved public land for outdoor recreation. Finally, the Bureau of Land Management was fully shifted to land retention in 1976. They have been fighting to give access to these lands since. What they're doing about it. The first thing the state is doing is reconsolidating their land grants. They have consolidated their trust through land acquisitions as well as land exchanges. States trade their state-owned land for more desirable land, like land with higher animal density or more natural beauty. They have also acquisition roads and certain parcels of private land to create easement of access. Arizona has had recent success with their walk-in access programs. They are using these programs as a short-term solution to unlock as much land in as little time as possible. The program essentially is to secure leases on privately owned lands that encompass or are next to the public lands that have no access. They then use these leases to create means of passage into lands. The issue is the lack of permanence with this solution. These leases would require constant renewal to keep walk-ins open. Another issue is that these small parcels only access smaller lands. Arizona needs roads to allow full access to larger landlocked areas. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is the main solution. This fund takes state dollars and directs them towards public lands and public use. The state then uses its own recreational outdoor plans to open these lands with funding. They revise and present these plans to Congress for continued appropriated funds. According to the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, many have recognized the power of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF, to open and expand access to federal public lands, but 40% of the program's funding must be directed to individual states by, among other means, matching grants to states and local governments for the acquisition and development of public outdoor recreation areas and facilities. In fact, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, more than 40,000 individual grants and $4.1 billion have been provided to states and localities for these purposes. Another new rule being developed by the Bureau of Land Management in Arizona is the Public Lands Rule. Proposed by the Department of the Interior, currently, BLM is in charge of managing multiple uses and sustained yield under the 1976 federal land policy. This means BLM's management is dependent on the land's ability to provide resources rather than conservation. The Public Lands Rule would apply land health standards and clarify that conservation is a use under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, according to PBS Arizona. This is important because it allows the Bureau of Land Management to make conservation of the public land and facilitating recreation their new priority.
So, in summary, access to public land is essential to preserving the cultural significance, customs, and identity of the natives and its people of Arizona. Moving forward, government and state officials and agencies need to work towards preserving this land and its natural beauty. It is a sanctuary and safe space where Arizonians can engage in fun recreational activities like hunting, fishing, hiking, and sightseeing. Use of this land for these activities that I just mentioned generates a lot of revenue for the state, as well as it would so be detrimental for the Arizona economy for its state to outlaw or restrict its use.
In order for state and government officials to allow its inhabitants to use the land as they deserve, they must take action to limit the placement of residential spaces around these lands. These residential areas make it hard for citizens to access these lands, as all of these residential areas are privately owned. Through the state's efforts in consolidating land grants, acquisition of roads, and purchase of leases, combined with the addition of drafting new laws like the Public Lands Rule, Arizona is making headway when it comes to addressing the issue. However, in order to ensure the long-term success of this endeavor, this activity needs to continue on a larger scale. In doing so, Arizona has the potential to preserve its beautiful public lands and its long-lived tradition of hunting, fishing, and sightseeing that its people have known and loved to this day. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, new legislation to open and protect public land, and current lease system are all solutions to the problem, and we have witnessed them firsthand, spending 4 days camping and hunting in the Coronado National Forest. This allowed us to fully appreciate the importance that public land has on the livelihoods of native Arizonans. While the scope of this video is focused on Arizona, most of Western America faces the same issue regarding public land. 6.35 million acres are landlocked or have no permanent legal access in the western half of America. For perspective, this equates to more acreage than the 8 most visited national parks combined. A big thanks to outdoorsmen and legislators that see the problem here, and outdoor companies like Onyx Hunt and the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. The lobbying and for funding and new legislation will continue to open public land and allow the American outdoorsmen to experience and conserve the beautiful nature that this country has to offer.